Hi there. Thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Genevieve Podesic. I am one of the coordinators of the Bumblebee Atlas in the Midwestern United States. I work primarily in Minnesota, Iowa, Missouri, and Nebraska. And today I'm going to be discussing how you can apply to be added to the federal recovery permit for the Rusty Patch Bumblebee that's held by Xerces. So I have a brief presentation that I am going to share with you. And we can go ahead and get started. So just to reiterate, today we are going to be discussing how you can apply to be added to the Rusty Patch Bumblebee Federal Recovery Permit that's held by Xerces. And just to start off, I wanted to give you a little bit of background information about the species and the federal protections that are in place for it. So the Rusty Patch Bumblebee is an endangered species. It's undergone major declines over the last few decades across much of its range. However, it is still present in some regions of the United States. And so in these areas, we need to be really careful to work within the federal protections for the species. So the Rusty Patch Bumblebee is a federally protected species, which means that there are legal protections in place for it in the areas where it's still present. Every year, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service puts out a map of where they believe the Rusty Patch Bumblebee to be present. And these are known as the Rusty Patch Bumblebee high and low potential zones, shown here in red and yellow. So those high potential zones are shown in red, and those are areas where the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service believes the Rusty Patch Bumblebee is present. And then those yellow areas are areas where they think the Rusty Patch Bumblebee is likely to be present. So to survey for bumblebees in any of these areas, you must hold a federal scientific recovery permit for this species. This is a federal permit, so it's granted by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to various organizations and research groups. The Xerces Society does hold one of these permits, and right now the only folks who are covered under it are the Bumblebee Atlas coordinators, so folks like me who work for the Atlas and who run everything. But this year we are planning to ask the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service if we can add some of our more experienced participants and volunteers to our permit so they can go out and survey independently in Rusty Patch Bumblebee high and low potential zones. I just want to emphasize here that the folks that we will consider to add to this permit must be really experienced. Permit holders must meet minimum qualifications that are mandated by the federal government. They really want folks who are really experienced to be doing any surveying for Rusty Patch Bumblebees. A lot of responsibility comes with holding one of these permits because their purpose of the federal protections that are in place for the Rusty Patch Bumblebee is to make sure that we're minimizing harm to them. So they don't want folks going out who are inexperienced, swinging at the Rusty Patch Bumblebees, potentially killing them. So really, we're only going to be considering people who, have a past background with wildlife or conservation, who are very experienced volunteers. So just to reemphasize how much responsibility this is, if somebody who is under our permit happens to kill a Rusty Patch Bumblebee while they're out surveying, our activities under that permit would cease for the year. So nobody would be allowed to go out and survey for Rusty Patch Bumblebees in that high and low potential zones for the rest of the field season. And that includes the coordinators, that includes the rest of the volunteers under that survey or under that permit. So we're really putting a lot of faith in you by adding you to our permit. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has outlined some minimum qualifications that they would expect all permittees to be able to exemplify. So folks need to be able to demonstrate an ability to identify bumblebees to species, because you need to be able to identify Rusty Patch bumblebees, differentiate them from other bumblebee species. Folks are expected to demonstrate an ability to complete surveys and technical reports, because we need to report all of the data that we collect back to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And then we also need folks to demonstrate an ability to handle bumblebees safely using aerial insect nets or vials to capture bumblebees and safely handle them. So if you would like to be considered to be added to the permit held by Xerces, you will need to put together an application packet demonstrating that you meet these qualifications. We'll basically hand that off to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for their review. This application form needs to include a resume detailing your past relevant work, volunteer, and educational experiences, 2 letters of recommendation from agency or academic staff. One of these letters of recommendation should specifically attest to your experience with bumblebees. The other one can attest to your more general field experiences. So if you've done surveys for another organization, for plants or other insects, one of your letters of recommendation can attest to those experiences. But it is better if both of them are related to bumblebees. And then you will also need to provide answers to 3 short answer questions that detail some of your experiences with the Bumblebee Atlas. And I'm going to just go into those in a little bit more detail. The first short answer question that we're going to ask you to respond to addresses your knowledge of Atlas protocols. At a minimum, we expect volunteers to have completed the online training workshop in order to be considered to be added to the permit. So every year we hold a 2-part spring workshop series addressing the ecology and conservation of bumblebees, as well as specific training protocols for the Atlas. So at some point, you will have needed to have either attended that webinar or watched the online videos. If you watched the webinar in a past year, so maybe not in 2024 but in 2023 or 2022, doesn't matter what year you completed the workshop, as long as you've completed it, that's totally fine. We also expect you to have completed the online Rusty Patch Bumblebee training, either by attending the Zoom webinar or by watching the online training video, and to have completed the Rusty Patch Bumblebee quiz and passed it. The next short answer question addresses your ability to safely handle bumblebees. So at a minimum, we expect you to have attended at least one in-person Bumblebee Atlas training where we go out and collect bumblebees and net them. We expect you to have completed at least 4 Bumblebee Atlas surveys independently, and then to have safely collected at least 50 bumblebees and then upload these observations to Bumblebee Watch. We will also accept a comparable level of experience. So if you're somebody who, say, has worked with bumblebees in the past for like a grad school project and you haven't logged 50 bumblebee observations onto Bumblebee Watch, we would still consider adding you to the permit as long as you can attest to a similar level of experience and back that up with letters of rec. Right, so the next short answer question will address your ability to identify bumblebees to its species. At a minimum, we expect applicants to have completed an advanced course on bee identification. So if you have attended Elaine Evans' Midwestern Bumblebee ID workshop, that totally counts here. I'm also planning to hold an advanced bee ID workshop sometime in December, which would also count towards this requirement. As long as you've completed a workshop that addresses both identification for males and females of the bumblebee species in your region, that would count towards this. The next requirement, we expect you to demonstrate proficiency in identifying the bumblebee observations that you've submitted to Bumblebee Watch. So, at least 95% of your observations that you've recently submitted should be correctly identified. We do understand that Bumblebee ID is a learning experience and process, and you may have started off, if this is your first field season, being kind of bad at Bumblebee ID, but have gotten progressively better. So we do want to provide you an opportunity to make up for those observations you may have incorrectly identified. So to do that, you can go in to Bumblebee Watch and then update your observations with a comment detailing what you missed the first time you submitted an observation and tried to identify it to species. So to do that, you can go into your account on Bumblebee Watch and then look through your observations. If you click on one of your past sightings, it will bring up a page where you can view the sighting history. So On the sighting history, once your observation's been verified, it will note whether or not the expert who verified your observation changed the species ID of that observation. And if you happened to get that species ID wrong, you can go in and make a comment explaining what exactly you missed the first time you tried to ID the species. So, if you happen to ID a bumblebee species and you missed the color pattern on T2 or the the eye size if it's a male, or the specific color pattern on the thorax, you can describe those things that you missed in the comment, and then we will consider that observation as being correctly identified. And if you are having trouble figuring out how many bumblebee observations and Bumblebee Watch that you have ID'd correctly in the past, or which ones you need to go ahead and rectify, you can shoot me an email and I can look at the data you've collected and note which ones have been incorrectly identified the first time. So I'm happy to help you with that. Just shoot me an email after this and I can help get you sorted. The application form will open up in November. Before you apply, please shoot me an email to let me know that you're planning to apply to be added to the permit so that I can prioritize verifying your observations in Bumblebee Watch so that you can get a sense of whether or not your ability to ID those bumblebees is meeting the standard that we have outlined. Please make sure to take a Bumblebee Advanced ID course if you have not already. As I mentioned, I'm planning to hold an ID course sometime in December, so keep an eye out for that if you have yet to meet that requirement. And then make sure that you prepare your CV or resume and then obtain those letters of recommendation. As I mentioned previously, you need to provide 2 letters of recommendation, one of which specifically attests to your experiences with bumblebees. I can provide one of those letters of rec if you are an Atlas volunteer and you are really leaning on your experience with the Atlas here in regards to your qualifications. So you can request that I submit one of those letters of recommendation on your behalf. So you really only need to obtain 1 letter of recommendation, but it does need to be from somebody who's a professional, so somebody who works for Minnesota DNR or for a academic organization like a college or university, and that it can't just be from like a friend who goes out and surveys with you or something like that. After you apply, we'll submit your application to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and then we'll have to wait back to hear from them whether or not it was approved. And if it was, you will need to complete an additional training course in the spring to go over permit requirements. So, what activities can and cannot be performed under that permit, how you report any findings, that sort of thing. Just want to say thank you for your interest. It's really exciting to have so many people be interested in applying to be listed on the permit and potentially work in Rusty Patch Bumblebee high or low potential zones. As I mentioned, if you are having any problems putting together your application, or if you have questions about how many bees you've correctly identified on Bumblebee Watch in the past, please just shoot me an email. My contact information is up right there. And I'm happy to answer any of your questions. So thank you for spending some time learning about the application process, and I'll be really happy to hear from you in the future.